We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. After 3 months of waiting, I finally got back my NatWest Bank subject access request. In a moment, I'll tell you what Dame Alison Rose's team had to say about me under her woke culture at the bank. It is even more poisonous than what Coots had to say about me. I wonder at the board meeting that comes up this Thursday whether she should really walk away with £11 million. We'll look back at the weekend's marches, the chanting that was going on, the flags that were being carried. I'll ask the question, does radical Islam now have free reign in this country? Did the police get it wrong, or do they need more powers? And we'll finish with finance as well, the Phillips Trust scandal, how people who were clients of building societies were referred to companies. They lost an awful lot of money, some of these people. One of the victims joins me tonight. It would appear the Financial Conduct Authority simply don't care about individuals losing their money. All of that comes after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening. The top story tonight, the Prime Minister has confirmed that the Gaza hospital blast last week was likely caused by a missile launching towards Israel. Rishi Sunak said in the Commons today the Al Ali hospital blast was caused by a missile or part of one that came from within Gaza. He also said the UK is providing an additional £20 million worth of aid to civilians in Gaza, as well as deploying RAF and Royal Navy personnel to the region.
The British government judges that the explosion was likely caused by a missile or part of one that was launched from within Gaza towards Israel. The misreporting of this incident had a negative effect in the region, including on a vital US diplomatic effort and on tensions here at home. We need to learn the lessons and ensure that in future there is no rush to judgment.
Well, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has told the Home Secretary the government may need to toughen the law on hate crime and terrorism. It comes after Sir Mark Rowley met with Suella Braverman to discuss the force's decision not to arrest protesters calling for jihad against Israel at demonstrations all over the UK at the weekend. Sir Mark said horrific and gruesome attacks by Hamas have also aggravated our own terrorist threats in the UK, with hate crime against Jewish communities up 13-fold compared to this time last year. Sir Mark said 34 arrests have been made so far, and the force is still trying to identify another 22 people from photography.
We're accountable for law. We can't enforce taste or decency, but we can enforce the law. Conversation finished really around the line of the law, and it's our job to enforce to that line. It's Parliament's job to draw that line. And the thought that maybe events of the moment are illustrating maybe some of the lines aren't quite in the right place.
Meanwhile, a London Underground tube driver who led a Free Palestine chant on his packed train has been suspended. Transport for London saying the driver who led the chant on Saturday has been suspended pending further investigation into the incident. It happened on Saturday as around 100,000 protesters took part in a pro-Palestinian demonstration in London. Footage posted online by a journalist appeared to show the chant being led over the train's speaker system. And lastly, a man who bought a pool table after winning £2.4 million on the National Lottery is now queuing up to represent England at the European Pool Championships. Neil Jones and his partner Julie Kirkham won the money just before Christmas 2010. After getting the table, Mr Jones took advantage of all the free time he had on his hand to brush up on his pool skills, and he's now risen through the ranks. He said representing England in Malta at the championships will be his proudest moment. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. 3 months ago, I put in a subject access request to NatWest Bank, who are, of course, the parent bank of Coutts. Normally, under the law, an SAR should come back in 30 days. However, they wrote to me and said it would take 3 months to come back because it was complex. Well, I was slightly tipped the wink on Saturday when Mohammed Kamal Saeed, who is the interim CEO, remember the last one, got sacked quite rightly, so he's the interim CEO of Coutts, said, "Dear Mr Farage, today you will have received the response to your third data subject access request. This includes commentary from other clients and members of the public who contacted the bank and has been made available to you in a separate document. Thank you for your patience whilst we process this complex request. In completing your DSAR, our processes have uncovered some inappropriate comments and poor behaviours, for which I would like to apologise and reassure you that we are following up on these areas as appropriate. As I said in my previous letter to you, we are committed to learning the lessons from this so that in the future we live up to the high expectations our clients rightly have of us. Yours sincerely, Mo." Well, I really hadn't I not, been tipped the wink. So in the 600 pages of documents, and we've just begun to have a look at it, it begins by them deciding, whether the account should be closed and talking about my extreme opinions. And actually what they have to say about this is quite extraordinary. And they say, if we close his account, I'd imagine journos would presume that it's one of the following. He is broke, he is involved with something shady, or we're doing it for political reasons. They go on now to say that if they didn't close my account, imagine what the impact might be. Consideration on the impact on staff with retaining a client who has been so vocal with racist, xenophobic, misogynistic and anti-Semitic views. Well, apart from all of that being absolutely vile and appalling, I suppose they thought if I stayed a client, there might be a terrible mental health impact. Just imagine the poor darlings at NatWest head office. But one of the key reasons I was debanked was over climate change, where they make it absolutely clear a particular area to consider is NF's stance on climate change. It does not align with the bank's purpose or B Corp objectives. Now, you know that B Corp, of course, B Corps, the organisation based in America that puts pressure on both the public and private sectors to go for a highly politicised agenda. They seemed very, very pleased when the account was closed by saying they hoped very much that had taken me down a peg or two. And they were, I think, even more thrilled when they saw the BBC headline. And this, of course, was the kicker. This is when Dame Alison Rose had broken client confidentiality, had briefed the business editor of the BBC, and the headline was, Nigel Farage bank account shut for falling below the wealth limit, which we know not to be true. And that led to much internal debate. And one of Alison Rose's team concluded that it was really very simple. It was just because I was some kind of awful human being. Yes, you're an awful human being, NF, lol, laugh out loud. But I guess that pleased them because as I started to respond publicly on this internal WhatsApp group within the head office of NatWest, it was said, what's the crackpot saying now? Well, all right, maybe they get me on that one, I'll give them that. But here's the one that really shows you and tells you so much about these people. They actually thought and hoped that because they'd closed me down and at the time nobody else would have me, that maybe, just maybe, I would even be driven out of the country, which I find absolutely extraordinary. Have we single-handedly drive, they put, NF out of the country? As if this was really the objective. It's funny, isn't it? When I first broke this story, and when nobody else would bank me, I did actually say, maybe I simply have to leave the country. And one of the other vile comments that we found was one that was actually physically, in a way, quite threatening. Yet one of them said that they would actually, I'd throw a milkshake at him if I was approached to open an account for him. Well, the only slight mitigation was one of the people there did post separately that they'd spoken to me on the telephone. Just had Nigel Farage on the phone. He is actually okay as a client. He sounded exactly like he does on TV. He is quite nice and lives not far from me. Oh, well, at least one of them there appears to be reasonable. Now, we, of course, have gone back to NatWest today, and they've come back and said, we have written to Mr Farage to apologise sincerely for the deeply inappropriate comments made about him and the poor behaviours displayed. Neither are consistent with the standards of service that our client should expect. The group has commissioned an independent review into recent events, phase one of which has been delivered to the board. And we will complete the necessary processes and publish the key findings along with the group's response as soon as possible. We are determined to learn the necessary lessons from this so that in the future we live up to the high expectations our clients rightly place upon us. So this is the review from a leading firm of London lawyers whose emeritus chair says that Brexiteers are xenophobic and racist. Quite how independent that's going to be, I don't know. What we do know is that the board meets on Thursday. The NatWest board meets on Thursday, that the quarterly figures are out on Friday, and that on Thursday they will be discussing the pay with which Dame Alison Rose leaves the NatWest group. At the moment, she's due to leave with just over 11 million quid. 11 million quid. And I would like to think that the evidence, and by the way, what I've shown you tonight is just a tiny percentage of what we'll uncover over the course of the next few days. This was the culture that Dame Alison Rose took NatWest to, and I hope the board deal with it properly. Now, last weekend, the 14th of October, we saw in London marches going through the streets of the capital. Something like 30,000 people turned up on the streets. And we, of course, saw those two women, you remember, with the Hamas paraglider photographs on their backs. And we were told by Suella, the Home Secretary, Braverman, that this wasn't good enough, that the police would act. Well, this weekend, the 21st of October, the protests were so much bigger. There were actually about 100,000 people on the streets. Palestinian flags to be seen everywhere. Desecration once again, of war memorials, this particular shot being the Bomber Command Memorial, but so much that we'd seen the week before, just this time on an even bigger scale. Protesters climbing up onto London buses, protests outside the Cenotaph, police helping a protester climbing down the scaffolding. Very concerned about this chap, they were. So concerned, they asked if he was OK and gave him back his Palestinian flag. Well done, the boys in blue. Absolutely marvellous. And he told the police, look out, there's more people up there. But it gets worse. It gets worse than the Palestinian flag, because we actually see protesters with a black flag. Now, this black flag, I think to many, would be seen to be a jihadi flag, a flag that we've associated in the past with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The police don't seem to think so. They seem to think this is some sort of religious symbol. Well, I would remind you, that whilst they wave this flag and make hateful chants about the Jews, here's our old friend Osama bin Laden sitting in front of that exact flag. And finally, and I could show you so many images, but finally, here's one of the protest groups shouting out in the streets of London, clearly calling for jihad. Now, the police have responded to all of this, but I'm not sure, frankly, many of us think their responses are satisfactory. Frankly, it seems to me that for the Met to say the word jihad has a number of meanings, but we know the public will most commonly associate it with terrorism. We have specialist counter-terrorism officers here in the operations room who have particular knowledge in this area. They have assessed the video filmed at the Hizb ut-Tahrir protest, by the way, a group that is banned in most other European countries, in central London today, and have not identified any offences arising from specific clips. And it goes on. So I suppose the debate here, really, folks, is have the police just turned a blind eye? Does radical Islam now have free rein on the streets of London because we're just too scared of them and there are just too many of them? Or is the boss of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, today right to say that actually the laws are not clear enough? Now, look, I am absolutely going to make this clear that I do believe the police were in a devil of a position. You know, the chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Well, it actually means the obliteration of Israel. But is that a level at which the police intervene? My own view is people shouting jihad and carrying around ISIS flags and shouting all sorts of things about the Jews, I would have thought those things had stepped way beyond the mark, and that just arresting 10 people on the streets of London on Saturday for this, frankly, was a joke. Well, I'm joined, I'm pleased to say, by Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, former UK ambassador to the UN, and, more importantly in this context, former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. Mark, I've accepted that it's a tough job for the police, and it's a hell of a tough job, 100,000 people, and, for the police... The Met said there was no chaos. We've got all sorts of video footage of real chaos going on out there. So I understand that they would not wish to provoke, a violent incident where they're hugely outnumbered. I get all of that. But when it comes to that ISIS flag, when it comes to all sorts of horrible things being chanted about the Jews, shouldn't they have done more?
Well, I think that is a subjective question, Nigel.
I know.
I would not criticise the police because I think they are in a very difficult position. They don't draw up the legislation. They try and police it up to the line of the legislation, as Mark Rowley said. And interesting, Mark Rowley himself said 2 years ago, recommended to the government that they change the law to close some of these loopholes and uncertainties. But actually what's happened is that in some ways it's actually become less strict, the legislation, than it was previously.
In what way?
For instance, they took out the words insulting language. Now, you can argue it's everyone's right to be insulted.
But it's all subjective in the end, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so, what they have to do is they have to be able to prove, and they were talking to prosecutors at the time of the demonstrations, that there was an offence or potentially an offence being committed. And they obviously decided with the flag, with the chanting of jihad, that maybe it didn't cross the line. Personally, I think Hizb ut-Tahrir, which you mentioned, which was the demonstration where some of that worst action happened, probably should be prescribed in this country. I mean, we prescribe 75 organisations. They are pretty bad, and they're very active in universities, for instance, in this country, and as you say, have been banned in many other countries. Glorifying terrorism is not an offence in this country. I think it probably should be. So there is things that could be changed in the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, there were even people up on lampposts setting off fireworks. And I mean, if anybody else did
some of those were arrested, though. I mean, 34 people have been arrested.
34 in total.
22 are being investigated, as already said. So, but a lot of those were for public order offences, like firing fireworks in a crowded place and things like that. Not many have been arrested under the Terrorism Act, as opposed to the Public Order Act, which is a bit different.
But do you see the concern? The concern is that those that are potentially glorifying hideous, whatever the historical rights and wrongs of this, I think anyone that doesn't condemn what happened on the 7th of October with that incursion into Israel, frankly, isn't human.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because it was absolutely, I say, whatever the history, whatever the grievances, it was absolutely vile in every sense of the word.
But criticising the government of Israel, or calling for a Palestinian state, is not illegal in this country, and it shouldn't be illegal in this country. I was National Security Advisor when the Xi Jinping of China came on a state visit. And his advanced people came, the security people said, we do not want any demonstrations against the People's Republic of China. That would be unacceptable. And we said, no, I'm sorry. We live in a free country. Maybe you don't, but we do. And we must allow demonstrations, even if they are highly critical of our visitors. So, getting that balance right is always going to be difficult.
But it is.
I would be very hesitant to criticise the police on particular operational decisions they've taken.
One of the chants in parts of the crowd was curse upon the Jews. Curse upon the Jews. I'm sorry. I think that goes way beyond the line, and
I'm sure that would...
And I believe in free speech.
And I am sure, of course. And I hadn't even heard that before, and I'm sure that's something that would be investigated.
It might have been at the edges. Yeah. And it's possible, to be fair to the police, that it's being investigated now.
But that is anti-Semitic, and there's clearly been a rise in anti-Semitism and a rise in Islamophobia as well. But overall, Nigel, I mean, it's quite impressive in a way that 100,000 people marched. And yes, there were some disturbances, but no one was seriously injured. And we have not had the sort of isolated terrorist attacks we've seen in France, we've seen in Belgium.
Well,
we haven't raised the threat level in this country yet.
No.
And that's of some credit to the police.
But there is one particular case that we can't talk about because it's sub judice, that will be coming, I think, to the courts very soon. The newspapers were hinting about it at the weekend. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but I think we'll find it's pretty close to some things that happened in France. So, Mark, thank you for coming in and giving us a balanced view on this. However, in a moment, what we will talk about are two young lads who turned up on Saturday with a cross of St George. We'll see how the police dealt with them, and we'll wonder why a march in Golders Green was effectively shut down by the police.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's stick with how things were policed on Saturday in London. Now, 2 young lads turned up with a cross of St George. No doubt there was a slight sense of impishness in what they were doing, but let's just have a look at what happened.
For the moment, anything racist or even close to racism is said. Hang on, let me finish. For the moment, anything gets anything close to that, all right, people are going to start getting arrested. This is just a verbal warning to let you know we're all on the same page. That's all it is. No, I'm not worried. It's not worried. I'm not having a go. It's not worried. No, it's not.
No, I'm sorry, but because 2 young lads turn up with a cross of St George, why on earth does that young cop assume they're going to say something racist when there were plenty of things being said amongst some of the other 100,000 that were clearly openly and overtly racist? And much as I accepted in the first part of this programme that the police have a devil of a job, and yes, they have to act within the law, but they also have to exercise discretion. And I have to say, that particular clip makes me blooming angry. Well, let's see what Graham Wesson, former Met police officer and author of How to Be a Police Officer, well, Graham, welcome to the show, as author of How to Be a Police Officer. I mean, there's something wrong there.
Not for me, and I know we're probably going to disagree on this. For me, and I think you have to take that, that's a clip. So I'm not sure what led up to it and what was said afterwards. They got the flag, St George's flag.
And what's wrong with that?
Nothing at all. But I think if you look at where they are and who they've got around them, who may not actually accept people with an English flag being amongst their protests.
Oh, I see. How dare you be English in London, you mean?
No, it's not that at all. It's just that. It's almost like, fellas, you just need to be careful today of where you are and what you're doing, and almost like just putting them on notice that there might be people that take exception to them. So it's almost for their own safety and well-being. There's no problem with them being there. And again, you can have, if you want it, not even a counter-protest, but you can have like a different people with different flags there. But it's almost just saying to them, just be careful don't get embroiled in like engagement or being too excited.
We could say then that the police thought that the fact they were there might be a provocation.
No, not a provocation, but just only for our own safety. So you're here with your flag, you're English, you're supporting England, that's great. You can do this, but just be mindful of that. There might be some here
which
that
is
actually
fine.
don't like you. So just be careful yourselves and look after yourselves. So be careful what you're saying. And I think it was just a word of warning. I'd be surprised if they didn't actually almost like, not warn them, but just say to them, fellas, just be careful how you behave today. That's it. Just be respectful and peaceful and go about your business.
Don't say anything racist because you're white and with that flag, so therefore we think you probably will.
He didn't say that, did he? He just said just be careful of any racist comments.
Yeah, OK. Now, more seriously, there was a pro-Israel march, protest planned for Golders Green, which has been known for a very, very long time as, I think, probably the most Jewish, certainly these days, the most Jewish part of London. They were expecting about 30,000 people to join this march. And in the end, police pressure led to the organisers saying, we've just got to cancel it. And, it was a pray for Israel. It was, in fact, the Christian Action that were actually behind the whole thing. And you can't help feeling, Graham, as I said at the start of this show, it's almost as if radical Islam will just sort of back off and say it's all a bit too tricky. But if you're a much smaller number of people, well, we're going to be tough on you. And I'm guessing here, and there was, in fact, the next day in Trafalgar Square, last night in Trafalgar Square, there was a last-minute impromptu gathering, which was very much about freeing the hostages, which I think passed off very peacefully.
Yeah, from what I've seen as well.
Thank goodness. But if I lived in Golders Green, and I was now living in a street that had taken out private security, because you can't expect the police to walk up and down the road every day. There's private security when the kids go to school, and this is where I've been forced in my life. And yet, when I want to have a peaceful march in my own district, I'm effectively pressurised by the police not to do it. Something seems very wrong there.
Look, I don't know the circumstances of why or what the pressure was, whether it was to do with either safety of the crowds on the roads or whatever. The police don't normally stop processions. They normally work with organisers to try and facilitate any form of protest or procession. So without knowing the facts of why that was called off, there could be any number of reasons why they felt it wasn't right to go ahead with it on whatever day it was.
In your view, it was interesting seeing Sir Mark Rowley earlier on, and he was really saying to the Home Secretary, because, she's been having a go at him, in a sense. He was really saying to her and the government, give us a clearer set of rules. Do you think it's possible to have clearer sets of rules to do with what we're discussing here, this subject? Or, in the end, does it just come down to police discretion?
The law's quite restrictive when you look at, and he was mentioning the Public Order Act, Terrorism Act. And the Public Order Act has basically got three threads running through it. Threatening, abusive, insulting, even when it comes down to inciting racial hatred. The act they do must have one of those three things in it. So they also had the Crown Prosecution Service lawyers, the specialist crime advisors there, who were looking at all those clips. From what they see on the clips, they couldn't see any offences taking place. That doesn't mean to say nothing will happen. It just means at the time, from what they can see and what they're being told, they don't think it's reached the threshold of a criminal offence. That doesn't mean it doesn't get investigated. They may have got a public order crime team who have been working on, you mentioned last Saturday's event as well. Last Saturday's event and this Saturday's event. They'll be going through clips and looking at all the context of what was said, where it was said, getting the officers to make statements on what they actually heard to try and build a bigger picture. You've then got more evidence of possible offences than you had maybe at 5 o'clock on a Saturday evening when you're looking at it on the screen. So, great phrase, justice delayed isn't justice denied. It may well be that somebody's people will be getting
No, that may be. Graham Wetton, thank you.
Thank you
for coming on and joining us. Folks, I've tried to be as reasonable as I can with both of the guests, and I understand it's a hell of a tough job for the police. I just can't help feeling that it's all a bit too one-sided at the moment, and it makes me pretty angry. In a moment, Robert Jenrick. Yes, the Cabinet Minister is going to close down 100 migrant hotels. He thinks it maybe will help the Conservatives hold lots of seats at the next election. We'll discuss that after the break.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life:
your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick is to tell us that the current 51,000 people who are staying in 400 hotels at a cost of £8.2 million a day, it's all going to be solved because 100 of the hotels will close. Interestingly, it would appear that most of them are going to close in key marginal constituencies. I'm guessing, Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer and friend of the programme, I mean, if you clear them out of hotels, you've got to put them somewhere, haven't you?
Indeed, and so where do you put them? I mean, are they going to put them up in barracks or in the BB Stockholm barge?
Yeah.
And that's already had challenges on human rights grounds, and which I know you're going to complain about. But
we'll come back to that. Yeah.
But the problem is that these accommodation are meant to be for short periods under Section 95 of the Immigration and National, and that's the problem. So when you're housing people for long periods, they've got a right to say, wait a second, you can't house me in a barrack, in dormitories, for months on end.
Oh, no, they've got all sorts of rights. I'm certain of that. One of the problems, of course, has been the massive backlog. Now, the government are pleased that only 25,000 young men have crossed the Channel this year. We're supposed to cheer as if that's some kind of victory. And interestingly, Jenrick has also hinted over the last couple of days that we can't stop the boats completely, which seems a bit of a surrender from where Rishi was. But they do say that the numbers of those waiting to be processed, that list is now declining rapidly. Is that because basically we just let everybody stay?
That's not actually accurate. What's declined is legacy applications.
Yeah.
So anything pre-June 2022, that's gone down by about 50%.
OK.
So that has declined. But what's happening is, as more people are coming through, the backlog is actually at 175,000. That's the current waiting backlog.
Still enormous.
Well, it's the highest it's ever been.
Yeah.
And so, and what they're trying to catch their tail, and the more people are coming. Thankfully, there's been a reduction of 30% from the numbers last year.
Yes.
Why that is, no one knows. I don't think it's down to the weather, and it's certainly not down to the French doing their job, or any government policies, but it's gone down.
Yeah, I mean, it's down. I think the weather's been a huge factor, actually. But, I mean, 200 came today because it was a relatively calm day. I think the weather has been a factor. The Albanians aren't coming because that particular loophole was closed. But still, you know, if I'd said to you folks at home 5 years ago, 25,000 young men will cross the English Channel in dinghies in 2023, you wouldn't have believed me. So whichever way you cut it, it's not that great. Much of this, I mean, of those that are going through the process, most get accepted, don't they?
They do.
Most are allowed to stay.
They do.
Because we can't deport them anyway.
And that's the problem, because we don't know where they're from.
No.
And people know that. When they embark on these journeys, they know that when they get here, nothing's going to happen to them. They will eventually settle in the UK.
I know.
That's the problem with
this. A huge part of the problem. Now, the big disincentive that the government came up, of course, with was the Rwanda plan. We've had the hearing, the 3-day hearing at the Supreme Court. We have a judgment coming in December sometime, we think. And it would appear from the briefings that are now coming out, you know, through the government, sort of back-of-the-hand stuff to senior journalists, they expect to lose.
I think that's the general consensus. And I think what's worrying is what advice are they getting before making these announcements? Because I read today in The Guardian that the next flight will be in February. Now,
yeah, I read that.
I read that article. So, I mean, I think, again, they're putting the cart before the horse and making these announcements for whatever reasons they have. But no, if they lose the Rwanda, if the government lose the Rwanda ruling, then I'm afraid that policy is dead in the water.
Yeah.
£100 million has also been wasted by the government.
And even if they win, they can be taken to our friends in Strasbourg, can't they?
Indeed.
I'm going to make a prediction. I think if the government does lose this case, which I think it probably will, I think that's the moment at which we get a big political shift and we start to have a serious debate about continued membership of the ECHR, where you and I will disagree very strongly. Do you still think we should stay part of this thing?
No, I think we need to look at the ECHR, the parts that benefit the country and the parts that don't. I'm totally with you.
So can we derogate from the bad bits?
Well...
Because it's been said before that there are rulings from Strasbourg that some member states actually just choose to ignore, and we sort of half ignored the votes for prisoners stuff. Is there some middle ground, do you think, somewhere?
It is in negotiation. Look, the treaty has to be ratified by all the members. And that's going to take how long? So can we just pull out some parts? No, we can't. We need to either remove ourselves from that, and then we have to remember Northern Ireland.
Do you know what?
And so I think it's a lot more complex.
And it's written into all the devolution packages. No, it is. Well, it's rather like the Brexit debate. Can we reform from within or do we leave? Ivan Sampson, thank you very much indeed. Now, a real what the Farage moment. Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, went to Israel, came back to Berlin to find that Jewish people had had Star of Davids on their doors. There were huge pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, frankly, demonstrations taking place in Berlin and other German cities. This in Germany, where never again, of course, is what they've always been saying since 1945, led to an interview in Der Spiegel where the German Chancellor has said we have to deport people more often and faster. Wow. The language is changing around Europe. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, the rugby on Saturday evening. I thought England played incredibly well. They've had a much better tournament than anybody thought. But we so locked the South Africans down for much of the game that it all got a bit spicy. Now, Tom Curry, our flanker, in one of these little rucks, there were crosswords with a South African hooker, Bongi Mbonambi. I probably pronounced that terribly. But Curry says, in the middle of it all, he was called a white C word. And he complained to the ref, and nothing has happened. And I personally think, generally, when things are said in the heat of the moment, they should be forgotten. But can you imagine if one of the England players had said to the South African hooker, you black so-and-so, you black C word? Can you imagine the international uproar there would have been? This, folks, is the world we live in, one of complete double standards in the most extraordinary way. I talked to you some weeks ago about the Philips Trust scandal, about the fact that building societies were advising customers to go to certain will-writing services and trusts, and that certain individuals had lost a huge amount of money, and yet the financial regulator appeared to wash their hands of it. This story is not going away. I'm going to speak to one of the victims next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The world is full of rules and regulations, endless rules and regulations. And yet, it seems that for some individuals, they can actually just lose their money and no one seems to care. Well, one Member of Parliament, who I'm pleased to say has picked up this Phillips Trust story that I ran a few weeks ago here, is David Simmons, and he's the MP, Conservative MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. David, I gave a brief outline on this a few weeks ago, that building societies had recommended people to will writing organisations, to trust companies, and in many cases, these people have lost a great deal of money, haven't they?
Yes, there's a group of members of Parliament who've been looking at what's happening to their constituents. And as we've begun to compare notes, what we found is a pattern where people have been introduced, often by their bank or a building society, to someone who's written a will or set up a trust for them. And then sometimes after that person's died, or maybe they've grown ill, often with dementia, and family members have stepped in and tried to help sort out their financial affairs. A situation's come to light where they may have lost their home, they may have seen assets that have been transferred beyond their control, or simply been sold something that's created problems for them. For example, people sometimes have set these up to avoid inheritance tax and created a capital gains tax liability for the people they meant the money to go to. So it's all sorts of problems beginning to emerge from it, and we need to make sure that those who profited from this behaviour are held accountable for that.
Yeah, I mean, David, a fool and his money is soon parted. If people get things right, they get things wrong in terms of their own investments. That's fine. You buy a stock, it goes up, it goes down. Whatever it is, that's down to you. I think what really angers people here is that in most cases it was the building societies recommending these services to their customers and receiving a commission, and then when it goes wrong, washing their hands of it. But even, and this is the bit that gets me, even the FCA arguing these weren't regulated products, nothing to do with us, Gov.
And that's not acceptable. I think the thing we're looking at is how we make sure that when a regulated financial institution provides or sells a service to its customers, that it's clear what the accountability is around that. Yeah. And we've all seen the adverts where companies are saying, you should sign up with this. We are regulated by one or another of these schemes. But the product that we're marketing to you at the moment is not regulated at all. And that's creating risks for people. And the argument that the buyer beware simply isn't sufficient. We need to make sure that we've got effective regulation so the customer knows exactly what they're buying and what the risks are.
But we also need an effective regulator. And I've read reams since my own battles with the NatWest group a few months ago. I've read reams of documents that have come from the FCA where they're literally bullying organisations to adopt inclusion and diversity quotas, where they're going to change the rules for who is an acceptable person to have a licence in the financial services industry, which will include social media comments that the FCA may not like. And they're spending an awful lot of time on this. And it seems to me, David Simmons, less time worrying about people getting ripped off.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the conclusion I've come to with many colleagues, that the purpose of the FCA and other regulators in other markets is to make sure that these businesses are doing their job properly. They're not there to promote best practice, they're to make sure that basic regulatory standards are being upheld so customers are not being put at risk. And that's what we need to see their focus being.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you promise you'll keep up the pressure? He's frozen. Well, I didn't get his answer. I'm going to assume it's a positive, given that he came on the programme to talk about it. Well, let's join a real-life victim. Gordon Crosswaite is a victim of the Phillips Trust scandal. Gordon, welcome to the programme. I know you're not a happy bunny. Just sort of in potted form, what happened to you?
It was my mother-in-law. She was introduced to the estate planning group by the Building Society, and they handed her over to a financial advisor who worked for their subsidiary company, Newcastle Financial Advisors Limited. And the whole aim was to get her to set up an investment fund and put it into a trust that belonged to the Family Trust Corporation. And that's what happened. And on 3 different occasions, she was advised to take funds from her building society accounts and other accounts with other building societies or savings, and put them into that investment fund that belonged to the Family Trust Corporation. And the Family Trust Corporation was taken over by the Phillips Trust Corporation. And between 2018 and 2019, we didn't hear anything from the Building Society or Newcastle Financial Advisors Limited about advising us that that money belonged to an unregulated company.
So the Newcastle Building Society recommended you take this course of action in the first place?
Yeah, even directly and indirectly, because their subsidiary company was a company that advised us to put the investments into the...
But I'm confused, Gordon, because the Building Society is a regulated company. Mm-hmm. Any money that is invested invested in markets, bonds, shares, whatever it is, they're all regulated products. How's the bit in the middle not regulated?
Well, because will writing and trust setup isn't regulated.
How is that the case?
It's Financial Conduct Authority rules, and obviously Financial Conduct Authority controls the Financial Ombudsman Service, who we've complained to, who have rejected that complaint on the basis that that wasn't an unregulated activity. And the Building Society, there are 8 building societies involved in this, not just mine at Newcastle. Yeah. But they're saying, well, we introduce you to will writing, but it was the estate planning group. They introduce you to setting up a family trust, but that was Newcastle Financial Advisors Limited. Newcastle Financial Advisors Limited were appointed by Openwork, which is another third-party company. But I failed to see if Newcastle Building Society weren't in control, how could somebody from a third-party company take money out?
And they, of course, Newcastle, and we will have a company response from them in a minute. Mm-hmm. Newcastle, on giving this advice to your family, received a commission for this.
Absolutely, yes, of course they did.
And probably
they don't market and promote things for nothing.
So how much money has this so far cost your family, this
well, first of all, the property was at risk, but we've got that back through legal process that we had to pay for. £117,000 invested through Newcastle Financial Advisors Limited and the Family Trust.
So this really hurts in lots of ways. What would you, Gordon, you know, I mean, as I said at the start of the programme, or start of this segment, you know, if you put your money into the stock market, you know, you might make money, you might lose money, and that's the way that it ought to be in a free society. Being misled into what you're being sold is a very, very different thing. The FCA don't appear to be interested in your case.
No, not, it's an unregulated activity, apparently. The financial advice and investment advice is a regulated activity, but they're getting away with it because there's a subsidiary company and a third-party company, and it's a triangle of convenience.
There's something very, very wrong here. Gordon, thank you for coming in and talking to me. Now, the FCA, of course, we have contacted, and an FCA spokesperson said this is a very complex... They always use that word, don't they? This is a very complex issue involving the provision of unregulated services by unregulated firms. Where concerns about regulated firms have been raised, we have asked the firms for more information, which we have scrutinised. We have also recently been sent information from consumers affected by this issue and are reviewing this currently. Gosh, it's all so familiar, really, isn't it? And a Newcastle Building Society spokesperson says, at no point have Newcastle Building Society had any involvement with the Phillips Trust Corporation. Any allegation which states we have consented to, supported, or been involved in any transfer from the Will Writing Company Limited to the Family Trust Corporation or Phillips Trust Corporation is untrue. I'll give you 10 seconds to answer that, Gordon.
Well...
Clean.
So they deny it, but they wrote to us reassuring us that the investments and properties were not at risk with the Phillips Trust Corporation.
You better keep hold of that letter, I think. Jacob, good evening. What have you got coming up?
We're going to talk about, we're going to look at why the police haven't done anything about protesters who seem to be promoting terrorism. And we've got one of the people who really knows about it, David Lord Anderson, who was the government's advisor, independent reviewer on terrorism legislation, to explain this, because it's not a simple area, that there are questions of freedom of speech, there are questions of whether the law is precise enough. We want to work out why people are able to go on the streets of London waving jihadi flags.
You know, I debated this at length too, because it seems to be very, very important. Sir Mark Rowley, you know, who's the new boss of the Met, who I personally think instinctively is infinitely better than what went before. You may say that's not a very high bar. But he kind of he's responding to the Home Secretary by saying the legislation should be more precise. Do you think it's the legislation that should be more precise, or the way the police interpret what's there already?
That's what I want to get to the bottom of.
Right.
Because it's
hard, isn't it?
It is hard, and we're often on this programme defending freedom of speech, aren't we?
Yeah.
So when a woman's arrested for praying outside an abortion clinic, we think that's outrageous.
Yes.
So freedom of speech is important, but promoting terrorism is illegal. And it's trying to get to the bottom of how do you divide this up? What is the line?
Yeah.
And once the line is crossed, is the police doing enough to enforce the law as it is?
Yeah.
And are they using the law to its full extent? Because it's not just terrorism law, it's public order law.
No,
and
it
other
is.
aspects.
And we care about free speech on this channel. But if you carry across St George, you could be in trouble. Let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, very good evening. I'm Alex Burkill. Here's your latest GB News weather update. It's already started to turn a bit wet and windy across some parts, but the wind and rain will become more widespread as we go overnight into Tuesday. There's a system pushing its way northwards up from France, but also a separate front that's currently making its way northeastwards across southwestern parts of the UK. This will bring some heavy rain as we go through the end of the day across southwest Wales in particular, and then spread into more central parts through the early hours. Also some persistent rain starting off in the southeast, pushing into more eastern northeastern England through the early hours of Tuesday too. A fairly mild night for many, though it could be a little chilly across the northwest of Scotland, perhaps a touch of frost here. For many, Tuesday is going to be a much wetter picture than on Monday. Heavy persistent rain across northern eastern parts of England. Could see some high totals, could be some disruption here, chance of some flooding too. Elsewhere, some bright sunny spells, but also a scattering of showers, and these showers could turn heavy, perhaps even thundery towards the south. Temperatures near normal for the time of year. We're looking at highs around 14 or 15 Celsius in the south, cooler further north. Into Wednesday, we will see a spell of wet weather across the southeast to start, and also some rain pushing into eastern parts of Scotland, perhaps northeast England. That could turn a little bit heavy at times, and coming so close to the heavy rain we saw last week, it could make ongoing issues